Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing who will be the Sharks' next starting goaltender for the 21-22 season. In my previous video, I had talked about whether or not the Sharks would end up buying out Martin Jones, and I concluded that due to the language that Doug Wilson had been using this offseason, that they're trying to do more of a retool compared to a rebuild, that the Sharks would be looking to at least be remotely competitive next season, and as such would likely end up buying out Martin Jones. And so it is technically possible that the Sharks would head into the next season with a goaltending duo tandem of Koshinash and Melnichuk, but it is also possible, and I'd say even more likely, that the Sharks will look to pick up some goaltending help. Also, when you look at the wording that Doug Wilson has used this offseason, that they'll look to pick up some goaltending help either through maybe a team being pinched in the expansion draft or just in general in free agency. To touch a bit more on the whole expansion draft situation, I'm not going to be talking about too many goaltenders, actually any goaltenders from that situation, but for instance, a team like the Minnesota Wild will likely be forced to protect Kaapo Kähkönen as their goaltender of choice, and as such, it'll be Cam Talbot with just a couple years left on his contract who will be left exposed and likely taken by the Seattle Kraken, though technically not a guarantee. So it's possible that the Sharks can swoop in and say, hey, Minnesota, we'll take Cam Talbot so you don't end up losing him for free, but they'd have to give up some assets, and I don't know how willing the Minnesota Wild would be to give him up, considering it is technically a player who they can get rid of and not be too hurt by it, and then still keep their full forwards and defensive roster. So in the end, it's a bit complicated, and it'd be a lot more easy to just look through the free agency for a goaltender in this situation for the San Jose Sharks, because there is definitely not a lack of choices this season. So starting off first here is Jake Allen. He was the backup goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens this season, backup for Carey Price, and actually ended up playing a pretty significant amount of games this season due to half of Price not playing too well this season, and also because Price has been injured a decent amount this season. He ends up getting 27 games started, which it should be noted, of course, as with all stats this season, this is in a shortened 56-game season. 27 games started would normally look quite backup heavy in an 82 game season, but with 56, this is almost half the year. Ends up with 11 wins, a 2.68 GAA, and a .907 save percentage. Not super inspiring numbers, but still, I would say, pretty average, and obviously better than what Martin Jones was able to put up this past season, so Jake Allen could be a decent choice for them. Next would be James Reimer, was like the second to third string goaltender for the Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricanes had an abundance of goaltending talent this season. Reimer was sort of back up until Nedeljkovic ended up emerging as this really strong goaltender for the Carolina Hurricanes, and he ended up getting all those starts in the playoffs this season, so Reimer was kind of pushed down the depth chart. But this year, he still started 21 games, 15 wins, a 2.66 GAA, and a .906 save percentage. These are average stats, and it should also be remembered that a team like Carolina was fantastic this season. They have a very, very good defense, a very, very strong team cohesiveness, and so they definitely play well in front of their goaltending, at least compared to a team like the San Jose Sharks, who we of course know don't necessarily play all that well in front of their own goaltenders, and so Reimer's stats could be propped up a bit by that. However, it should also be noted that the Sharks are somewhat familiar with Reimer. He was with the team briefly in 2016. He was along the ride for that 2016 Stanley Cup run, so they could technically go with some familiarity there by picking up a player like Reimer. If they want a different Carolina Hurricanes goaltender, and likely a better one, they could also try and pay a bit more to get Peter Marazzic, also an unrestricted free agent this season. He was the starter for the Hurricanes at the start of the year, but due to an injury that kept him out for a pretty long period of time, he would end up getting sort of pushed down the depth charts. He would return for a few more games near the end of the season, but in the end, Nedeljkovic would win out, and as I said, get those playoff starts. So it is very likely that with Nedeljkovic being the new starter for the Hurricanes, Marazzic will want out to be a starter somewhere else. And who better than the San Jose Sharks to give him that opportunity? 12 games started this season, 6 wins, a 2.06 and a .921 save percentage. So some very, very good stats. Obviously propped up somewhat by the fact that the Hurricanes were that good team, like I said. But still, you take a look at the comparison between the stats of Reimer and Marazzic, and you see that Marazzic was significantly better this season than Reimer was, though with a bit of a smaller sample size. So Marazzic could definitely be a solid option for the Sharks. Next, talk about Jonathan Bernier. Was with the Detroit Red Wings this season. 23 games, started with 9 wins, a 2.99 GAA, and a .914 save percentage. Obviously, those numbers don't jump off the page. Just 9 wins in 23 games started, and very close to a 3.00 GAA, just 0.01 below that. Is not fantastic, but it should also be remembered, like I said, with the Hurricanes propping up the stats of their goaltenders, the Red Wings certainly bring them down, as the Red Wings were one of the worst teams in the NHL this past season. I believe even worse than the San Jose Sharks, so that's saying something. And yet Bernier still looked quite solid, had a few heroic games. He was in obviously an extremely tough division with the likes of the Lightning, with the Hurricanes themselves, the Panthers, who are all very offensively oriented teams, and yet Bernier still looked solid, and you can tell by the stats. Yes, the 2.99 GAA isn't very good, but that's because the Red Wings gave up a ton of shots, and that's why Bernier's save percentage of .914 was actually quite above average. So in the end, he's a goaltender who has bounced around a lot of different teams. He's on a team who right now is in a 1A, 1B situation of goaltending, as he's with Thomas Greiss in that situation. And so it's possible that if the Sharks offer him a bit of a starting role with them, he may want to sign there, and that could be a pretty decent bet for the Sharks. Next is Yaroslav Halak. Was the current backup goaltender for the Boston Bruins and has been for the past couple of years. 17 games started this season, 9 wins, a 2.53 goals against average, and a .905 save percentage. Halak throughout his career has been an extremely solid goaltender, at times being a starter, at times being a backup. This was his first year that was maybe slightly down in terms of stats, but it's definitely possible that Halak could bounce back from that. He is getting a bit up there in age, but as I've pointed out earlier, the Sharks are not looking for a long-term solution just yet in net, and are likely more so just looking for short-term, maybe this year, potentially one more year after that before they try and find more of a long-term starter for themselves. And so Halak could definitely fill a role there. He's been very good throughout his career, as I said. And finally, the last choice, and maybe the most interesting one, would be Pekka Renee. He has been with the Nashville Predators his entire career, but over these past 2 seasons, he's kind of been supplanted by the up-and-coming Juuse Saros, who has played every single playoff game for the Nashville Predators this season. And so, while it is technically possible that Renee, seeing as he was with the Predators his whole career, will want to remain with the Predators and retire as a Nashville Predator, it is also technically possible that if a team comes around and offers him a very good opportunity, like the Sharks could very well do, he may end up leaving. It's not like we haven't seen something like this occur in the past. You know, Daniel Alfredsson was a long-time Senator and ended up leaving for the Detroit Red Wings at the end of his career. Martin Brodeur, to take a goaltending example, was with the Devils his entire career, and in his final season ended up leaving for the St. Louis Blues in that one last year, because the Blues were offering him a contract and the Devils just couldn't really afford to do so, and Corey Schneider had won out in that sort of goaltending duel, I guess you could say. And so, again, if the Sharks offer him that starting role, it would be difficult for Renee to decline, because obviously the other option is staying with the Predators and getting maybe 20-30 games in a year behind Juuse Saros. So Renee, considering his very, very strong resume, could be a good option. Obviously is getting a bit up there in age, kind of like Halak, and maybe this bit of a downturn in terms of stats is obviously pointing out here. 21 games started, 10 wins, a 2.84 goals against average, and a .907. Obviously, the stats have been taking a bit of a downturn, but it is not a long-term solution. As I said, it's short-term, and Renee for 1 year will probably be a pretty good option for the Sharks, and almost certainly would be end up being better than what Martin Jones gave them this past year. But that would do it for this video. Even though I covered 6 different goaltenders that the Sharks could target during this offseason from the free agency, the fact is that the market is even more massive than that. I mean, there's more goaltenders who I didn't even talk about. You know, someone like Antti Ranta from the Arizona Coyotes. Yes, he's an injury magnet, which is the reason why I don't have him on this list, because I don't know if Ranta would be a smart choice, but he is technically an option, and there are even others as well. And so the Sharks definitely have the pick of the litter in terms of goaltenders who can be their starter next season. So it'll be very interesting who they pick up, and honestly, even if they do, it's technically possible, considering we have seen some decent things from Koshinash. If maybe they want to go into the next season with just those two as a duo, Koshinash and Melnishak. I guess we'll see what Doug Wilson decides to do. Class dismissed.